when in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation.
I mean, the issues of race and racism are a nationwide global phenomenon, but things are different in the South, very different in terms of how space is shared.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
You know, I grew up here all my life, and you see it, and it almost has become normal. Isn't that, that's sad to say, you know, that you see how people are treated differently.
Prudence, indeed, will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed.
But when a long train of abuses and usurpations pursuing invariably the same object evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security.
Turn poverty-level jobs, which are the jobs that African Americans are working in and Latinos are working in this community, into better paying jobs.
Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injustice and usurpations, all having in direct objects the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world.
The United States of America prides itself on being a nation of people from all over the world, coming together for the common goal of freedom. Freedom from tyranny and oppression, and freedom to pursue happiness and prosper. But what happens to our society when certain groups of people aren't afforded the same opportunities as other Americans? Hi, I'm Morgan Kauphusman, and as a Southerner, I grew up thinking that the North was a promised land of sorts, where discrimination was a thing of the past. So it was shocking to find out that the Northeast and the Midwest are home to the most segregated cities in the country. Milwaukee in particular is consistently on the top of the list, and I wondered why. Tonight's program examines the history, economy, and effects of segregation in Southeast Wisconsin. As important as the past is, it's our future that will determine where we go from here. Milwaukee, like the rest of the nation, is a city built on immigrants looking for work. Southeastern Wisconsin attracted numerous European immigrants with the promise of good-paying manufacturing jobs.
German immigrants, Irish immigrants, Italian immigrants, Polish immigrants, Czechoslovakian, Jewish immigrants, and they came to the city to work. And the pattern was that they would come to the city and they'd come to the parts of the city where the housing was the cheapest, what today we would call the central city. And then as they got jobs in large manufacturing plants, they would earn enough money to buy a home and became what we know as the blue-collar middle class.
Like their European American predecessors, African Americans began migrating north in search of a better life.
You see a significant out-migration of black Southerners moving to northern regions, cities, primarily for employment and labor opportunities. What happens, of course, with those migratory practices is racism follows.
African American migration into Milwaukee took place later than in cities like Chicago, Detroit, Cleveland, and Pittsburgh. It took place really, it began in the late 50s in large numbers and really increased in intensity in the 1960s.
What we see nearly upon the moment that blacks are arriving are clashes between working class blacks and whites for labor opportunities.
We began to see a process of what we would call deindustrialization and deunionization. The very factories that had attracted people to this community, generations of migrants to the city, began to move. African Americans essentially moved into the city and, in a sense, you could say, became trapped. They moved into the city, as all migrants did, but the jobs left.
Across Midwestern and Northeastern cities, racial segregation began taking a stronger foothold as middle-class white Americans began moving to suburban communities.
It's not surprising that Milwaukee, Detroit, Philly, and these other cities are also significantly segregated because they have significant numbers of black people who arrive to these places because of the pools that labor and industry provided.
You end up with a population that essentially is heavily concentrated in the city of Milwaukee. And when people say that we're the most or second most segregated city in the country, what they're really talking about is by housing pattern.
Soon enough, housing patterns are called into question as the modern civil rights movement gains steam. The country erupts when lawmakers, activists, and citizens clash over human rights. Some politicians fuel the fire, calling segregation necessary. Others take a different approach.
It was founded on the principle that all men are created equal and that the rights of every man are diminished when the rights of one man are threatened. We are committed to a worldwide struggle to promote and protect the rights of all who wish to be free. And when Americans are sent to Vietnam or West Berlin, we do not ask for whites only. It ought to be possible, therefore, for American students of any color to attend any public institution they select without having to be backed up by troops. It ought to be possible for American consumers of any color to receive equal services in places of public accommodation, such as hotels and restaurants and theaters and retail stores, without being forced to resort to demonstrations in the street. And it ought to be possible for American citizens of any color to register and to vote in a free election without interference or fear of reprisal.
It ought to be possible, in short, for every American to enjoy the privileges of being American without regard of his race or his color. In short, every American ought to have the right to be treated as he would wish to be treated, as one would wish his children to be treated. But this is not the case. It is not a sectional issue. Difficulties over segregation and discrimination exist in every city, in every state of union, producing in many cities a rising tide of discontent that threatens the public safety. Nor is this a partisan issue. In a time of domestic crisis, men of goodwill and generosity should be able to unite regardless of party or politics. This is not even a legal or legislative issue alone. It is better to settle these matters in the courts than on the streets, and new laws are needed at every level, but law alone cannot make men see right. We are confronted primarily with a moral issue. It is as old as the scriptures, and is as clear as the American Constitution.
The heart of the question is whether all Americans are to be afforded equal rights and equal opportunities, whether we are going to treat our fellow Americans as we want to be treated. If an American, because his skin is dark, cannot eat lunch in a restaurant open to the public, if he cannot send his children to the best public school available, if he cannot vote for the public officials who will represent him, if, in short, he cannot enjoy the full and free life which all of us want, then who among us would be content to have the color of his skin changed and stand in his place? Who among us would then be content with the counsels of our patience and delay?
We preach freedom around the world, and we mean it, and we cherish our freedom here at home. But are we to say that the world, and much more importantly, to teach each other that this is the land of the free except for the Negroes, that we have no second-class citizens except Negroes, that we have no class or caste system, no ghettos, no master race except with respect to the Negroes? This time has come for this nation to fulfill its promise. The events in Birmingham and elsewhere have so increased the cries for equality that no city or state or legislative body can prudently choose to ignore them. The fires of frustration and discord are burning in every city, north and south, where legal remedies are not at hand. Redress is sought in the streets, in demonstrations, parades, and protests, which create tensions and threaten violence and threaten lives.
Protests and demonstrations in Milwaukee mirrored the rest of the nation during civil rights. Black Americans and some whites fought side by side to improve housing, employment, and educational opportunities. Still, as poverty overruns lower-class blacks, middle-class whites continue to leave the city in droves.
When those northern expressions of that movement became a bit more boisterous, saw a modicum of success, that also helps to spur more white flight. The battles over school desegregation, in many ways, and probably more so than any other issue, helps to fuel this process by which residential spaces become rigidly segregated.
The private sector in this community has been very slow to become equal opportunity employers, if you will. And as a result, African Americans have had a very difficult time earning the kind of incomes that would allow them to disperse throughout the community.
The economic downturn Milwaukee experienced affected more than just housing patterns and employment. Public schools have also fallen victim to Milwaukee's collapsing economy.
The schools are overcrowded, they're underfunded, they're under-resourced. People who do have resources get their kids out, they get them into 220, they get them into private school. And so you end up with schools that in many ways are warehousing large numbers of very poor children who are educationally disadvantaged.
Urban schools don't get the resources they need. And then of course you have this era where folks are using tests to determine the effectiveness of school and individual performances in schools in an environment where resources are limited. Poverty creates a whole array of problems and challenges that kids have to endure. You know, how is a kid supposed to perform effectively in the classroom if they're not nourished properly?
African Americans are not the only culture affected by segregation and a floundering economy. Hmong, Middle Eastern, and Latino communities have all experienced hardships due to discriminatory practices.
In the Midwest, we deal a lot with black and white issues. Obviously, when we get outside of the Midwest, and even in the Midwest now, we have increasing numbers of Latinos, right? And so we see the Latino community isolated and sort of restricted in some ways because of patterns and practices around residential segregation.
They want Latinos, for example, to fix their lawns. They want them to roof their homes, but they don't want them living in their community.
And the impact that it's had on Latinos, it has caused, because we have a lot of undocumented Latinos, that every Latino is now suspect of being undocumented, okay? If he looks Latino, let's ask him for an ID. Unfortunately, they'll be forced to work for very poor wages. Right now we have this big attitude towards undocumented workers.
The negative mindset toward Latino immigrants is unfortunately not a new sentiment in America. In the past, Irish, Polish, and Italian immigrants all experienced hostility as they tried to make a new home here in America. But today, some Americans are still being targeted for their religious affiliations. It is important to talk about the current conflict facing Muslim Americans today. Since the tragedies that befell the country in 2001, increasing animosity toward Islam has made it extremely difficult for some Americans to exercise their First Amendment right. For some Muslims, wearing a hijab, a taqiyya, or other religious dress quickly identifies them, making them subject to religious segregation. Current battles over civil liberties are still being fought, but too often racism and intolerance are passed off as nationalism. Although, if American history has shown us anything, it's how to stand up to oppression so justice and democracy can prevail.
You are not to be so blind with patriotism that you can't face reality.
Wrong is wrong.
No matter who does it or says it.
Be peaceful.
Be courteous, obey the law, respect everyone. But if someone puts his hand on you, send him to the cemetery. Nobody can give you freedom. Nobody can give you equality or justice or anything. If you're a man, you take it. Never takes a back step.
Only in the face of more power.
Time is on the side of the oppressed today. It's against the oppressor. Truth is on the side of the oppressed today. It's against the oppressor. You don't need anything else. You can't separate peace from freedom because no one can be at peace unless he has his freedom. Can't separate peace from freedom because no one can be at peace unless he has his freedom. Believe in the brotherhood of man, all men. But I don't believe in brotherhood with anybody who doesn't want brotherhood with me. I believe in treating people right, but I'm not going to waste my time trying to treat somebody right who doesn't know how to return the treatment. Without education, you are not going anywhere in this world.
I believe that there will be ultimately a clash between the oppressed and those that do the oppressing. I believe that there will be a clash between those who want freedom, justice, and equality for everyone, and those who want to continue the systems of exploitation. I am not a racist. I'm against every form of racism and segregation, every form of discrimination. I believe in human beings and that all human beings should be respected as such, regardless of their color. You're not ready to die for it. Put the word freedom out of your vocabulary. You don't have to be a man to fight for freedom. All you have to do is be an intelligent human being.
We are nonviolent with people who are nonviolent with us. Race of people is like an individual man until it uses its own talent, takes pride in its own history, expresses its own culture,
affirms its own selfhood.
It can never fulfill itself. For one, belief that if you can give people a thorough understanding of what confronts them and the basic causes that produce it,
they'll create their own program.
And when people create a program, you get action. It is a time for martyrs now, and if I am to be one, it will be one for the cause of brotherhood.
That's the only thing that can save the country.
After learning so much about Milwaukee's history and the effects of segregation, it became evident that the way to improve our current condition is through brotherhood and compassion. The core of who we are as a country is deeply rooted in our ability to better our society through understanding. But there is still work to be done. Just like there are laws to fight discrimination, there is still some legislation that opposes racial equality. In the face of resentment and suspicion, Latinos are fighting for their rights just as African Americans are. But the community still struggles with the creation of new policies.
The fact that we have laws against discrimination and segregation, why is that? Because it exists.
I think it's pretty safe to say that there are racialized policies at work that affect black people and other ethnic minorities, and that's pretty obvious. There are all kinds of laws on the books that look to deny someone the opportunity to deny someone else an opportunity. While it can be viewed in all kinds of ways, the bottom line is the voter ID issues here that we're grappling with are blatantly racist, right? And it may not look like it's racist in terms of the way the law is written, but the impact, the potential consequences, intended or unintended, are going to affect more of one population than the other, and that appears to be purposeful.
But the effects of prejudice hurt more than just those who were ostracized. New generations of Americans are at risk of losing what it means to be an American.
For those folks who prefer to live in a homogeneous environment, whether that is all white, they are missing out on the beauty of the American experience, which is we are a nation of immigrants. We are a nation of people from diverse backgrounds, diverse walks of life.
On one level, segregation seems to be out of habit, but some communities remain segregated partly as a safe haven from discrimination.
Of course, with all populations, we generally want to congregate with people who are familiar with us. You know, we all like some version of familiarity and similarity in terms of community.
If you go into the Latino community today, you will find doctors, you will find lawyers, you will find businesses, you will find everything that they need. So they become segregated in that community.
And so while there might be some tendencies for folks to congregate and live in a particular region because of familiarity with a community group, there are still a whole range of other practices afoot that will also impact life chances that then move us back into the conversation we're having, which is why is segregation a problem? Why is this an issue?
The answer seems to lie in finance and education. Because impoverished minorities rely on underfunded school systems for education, they are inhibited from achieving the American dream.
If you look at the places, beginning with the Reagan administration, when they began to cut federal spending, they didn't cut defense. What they cut were education, social services, the very places where African Americans and other minorities had gotten a little bit of a foothold in the middle class.
We live in the supposedly the most developed country on earth, and yet we go into urban schools that barely have any digital technology. If young people aren't able to be exposed to these kinds of things early on, we're limiting their life chances.
Once again, Latino Americans have a whole nother set of issues to deal with. Along with underfunded schools, they are also fighting immigration policies that can inhibit the education of some Hispanic Americans.
Because for that reason, you're segregating Latinos from going to school, to getting higher education. Okay, you're telling them they can't go to school. You're stopping a whole, population of people from getting educated.
If you have access and the opportunity to go to a college or a university, you've already dramatically altered your life chances. By virtue of just being in contact with other people from other parts of the United States or other parts of the world, your worldview has changed dramatically. If you've always lived in the same place, the same neighborhood, or generally in the same area, and haven't had the chance to get some exposure beyond that, your life chances become truncated severely.
The bigotry, injustice, and intolerance that minorities experienced in the past is still very real for some Americans. But in spite of everything, we are a long way off from where we were 50 years ago. And though we have battles yet to be fought, it is our hope for a better life that unites us as much as the American flag. Even though it won't happen overnight, each of us already have what it takes to effect change.
I believe that I have to change myself first. And then, like I said, I can be the example for others. I would like to see more people get an education. I would like us to push education more, because I've seen what education has done for me. It has empowered me, not just within being able to do a job, but it has empowered me as a person. And the only way that these things, that segregation happens, discrimination happens, is if we allow it within ourselves.
People have to be committed to a human experience and a civil experience. People have to be committed to humanity and civility. And in order to undo this thing, it requires that kind of commitment.
While exploring the issues of racial segregation in Milwaukee, I learned what the city is all about. I quickly discovered that Milwaukee is a city of hard-working people trying to enjoy their lives as Americans. But I also saw very clearly that if we come together, we can truly achieve greatness. Is it ever going to be perfect? No. But as Vince Lombardi once said, we are going to relentlessly chase perfection, knowing full well we won't catch it, because nothing is perfect. But in the process, we will catch excellence. Once again, I'm Morgan Kauphusman. And before closing tonight's program, remember that with growth and understanding, we can have faith in where we go from here.
You may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still
like dust I rise.
Does my sassiness upset you? Why are you beset with gloom? 'Cause I walk like I've got oil wells pumping in my living room.
Just like moons and like suns, with the certainty of tides, just like hope springing high,
Still I'll rise. Did you want to see me broken, bowed head and lowered eyes, shoulders falling down like teardrops, weakened by my soulful cries?
Does my haughtiness offend you? Don't you take it awful hard? 'Cause I laugh like I've got gold mines digging in my own backyard.
You may shoot me with your words, you may cut me with your eyes, you may kill me with your hatefulness,
But still like air I'll rise.
Does my sexiness upset you? Does it come as a surprise that I dance like I've got diamonds at the meeting of my thighs?
Out of the huts of history's shame, I rise.
Up from the past that rooted in pain,
I rise.
I'm a black ocean, leaping and wide, welling and swelling I bear in the tide, leaving behind nights of terror and fear.
I rise.
Into a daybreak that's wondrously clear.
I rise.
Bringing the gifts that my ancestors gave. I am the dream and the hope of the slave.
I rise. I rise. I rise.